Hey, greetings there, everyone. It's GleeCon. And as promised, I am back again with a second record for the day. Thank you so much for tuning in. So, I'm bringing another issue, another episode of the Folklore and Fables of Azeroth. A novel, not a novel, a collection of little short stories that I received as a gift a couple years back that I've been saving. It's a hard copy, so I have to scan it. Folk and Fairytales is what it's called. Warcraft, Folk and Fairytales. Though we've read one episode right before I went away on break, and it was about some Volpira. This is another one where it could hypothetically happen at any point during the history of Azeroth. It's called The Courageous Kobold and the Wickless Candle. So stay a while and listen. Now, this one's by Allison Irons, and Kobolds, I guess, anytime from the origination, most likely again after the Curse of Flesh. This story could take place, although kind of like the last one, I think there's probably some hints to where it might happen further down in the timeline, but most assuredly, it could have happened any point that we've read so far. This is also illustrated by Lindsay Burker. The last one we read was kind of like a scary story to tell in the dark. It ended up being that kind of story, so we'll see what this one goes as. And again, I apologize in advance for my voice. I was fine this morning, but now that I've been a whole day back at home, I don't know if it's being around the husky or if it's being back in my own states with all the rain and everything, but I'm feeling, it could also be Lady GleeCon. She said she said this right before she left for work this evening. She said, I think maybe I've been fighting off a cold. And then I said, well, I hope that I hope I haven't been exposed. And she said, oh, definitely. You're all up in it. So it could be all in my head, but I feel a little bit tight. Before I do the throat work coming up here, I'm a little bit tight in the vocal cords, so let's see how it goes. After this, I'm going to be making a record for the new Patreon content for the Assassin's Creed material. I'm going to do an introductory one. I will probably include a link to that on the next episode that I post, whether it's this one or whether it's the next Stone Talon Mountain one that we do tomorrow. I will start including links to that. I should get the Patreon fully ready, published, and polished, ready to go by tomorrow. All right, here we go. Got a little pickaxe there, little pick. In the way deep down of twisting and turning minds, it was a bright kobold's turn to tell the sleep time story. Twig Whisker Snoot found a candle bigger than her arms could reach around and lit its oiled wick. With a strike of her flint, light bounced about the rough-hewn stone walls of her burrow. If there was one thing every kobold dreaded, it was darkness, and terrified Twig was no exception. There we have that same kind of iconography that we've had. Comforted by the warm candlelight, Twig flopped herself down on a small pillow of moss beside her hunched grandmother and awaited her audience. The other tenderfoots scampered down from their parents' dens and cuddled up to one another, chittering in anticipation. The most eager of the bunch, the tiny tallow Whisker Snoot, practically sat on Twig's foot to get the closest seat. He was wearing his best necklace, which was strung tight with his favorite rocks, just for the occasion. Meanwhile, Granny Whisker Snoot nestled beside her granddaughter, grooming an unruly puff of fur on Twig's head. "You're sure this story is the one you want to share?" she asked gently, fussing her granddaughter's ragamuffin fluff back into shape. "Yes, yes," Twig replied, bobbing her head with excitement. "It me favorite story. Everyone will love it." She lowered her ears a bit, sinking into her shoulders. "As long as Granny no mind, this Granny's story, and me want to share." "This Twig's story now," Granny smiled approvingly before coughing hard into her apron. Twig rubbed her back, eyes soft. Despite her age and dwindling health, Granny always made the journey from her cozy nest down to the common cave to spend time with her granddaughter, even when her paws ached with cold and she had to lean on her pickaxe for the voyage back. The least Twig could do was show everyone how remarkable Granny was. When twitching ears and flicking tails finally settled down, Twig smirked at her captive audience and began to tell her tale. Many long time ago, Whisker Snoot Kobold tunnels crumbled, keeping us all in the deepest dark. Not safe to go higher, decided long ago. Lived in bottomless tunnels all our lives, and our parents' lives, and their parents' lives we have. By wax and wick we dig and sit. What a bore. Me say there is something better out there, and it's true, there is. Granny Whiskersnoot was doing as we kobolds do, picking the shiny from the rock and minding the candle. She followed the saying as all Whiskersnoot do, never pick above your snout. But Granny brave and Granny curious, she picked a little bit above snout day after day. After a long time, Granny began to wonder if anything up there at all, but then she felt dust falling on her. Above Granny's head was a crack in the rock and a light. She stood on the wee tips of her toes, and what did she see? A candle. But not just any candle. This candle burned bright and bright, but it needed no wick. This candle could stay lit forever and never snuff out. Granny left to lead other Whiskersnoot kobolds to the Wickless Candle, but could never find it again. But she always remember its help. And she tell Twig, and now Twig tell you. Granny clapped her frail, thin paws as Twig took a dramatic bow. The rest of the tenderfoots were rapt at the wondrous tale. A candle that needed no wick? What other wonders might they behold by digging upward? They clambered on top of one another, asking Twig and Granny for more stories about the Wickless Candle, but Twig's perpetually unhappy papa, head of the Whiskersnoot clan, interrupted the sleep-time story and folded his mucky paws firmly across his chest. The youngsters all pinned their ears back, Twig included, as if to block the scolding words from entering.
Twig forget rest of Whiskersnoot saying, never pick above your snout, else the darkness snuff you out. Twig tell dangerous story. Old Whiskersnoot pick above snout and lost minds. Trapped generations down here many long time. Nothing good come from up above.
It's okay, Papa Whiskersnoot,
one of the bolder younglings piped up.
We know it's just story, not real. No, not real.
Twig felt like her tail had been trampled. She knew the story was true. Granny had told her so. But as she looked around the group, whose curious eyes had glittered like gemstones just moments ago, they now shook their heads. Just a story, some echoed. Not real. No, not real.
Good. Now sleep time, all of you,
Papa Whiskersnoot said with a huff. The tenderfoots followed him back to their warrens, avoiding Twig's disappointed eyes.
Me sorry, Twig,
Granny sighed sadly, and the sigh turned into a hoarse wheeze.
Kobolds don't trust what lies beyond their noses. Fearful, skittish. You told story well. Maybe in time they believe too.
Granny stood wearily and rested her weight against her pickaxe.
Me heart no Wickless Candle out there, and me heart is with Twig.
She lovingly patted Twig's shoulder and shuffled her way to bed. As Granny departed, Tallow tiptoed up beside her and tugged on Twig's sleeve.
Me believing with a Wickless Candle?
Twig crouched to meet Tallow's eyes and found no lie there.
You do? Me do.
Tallow nodded with a large grin and a cartoonish bobble of his head. The string of shiny rocks around his neck jingled playfully as he spoke.
Me want adventure, excitement like Twig do.
Feeling a little less terrible, Twig stayed up late with Tallow. They whispered to each other about all the adventures they'd go on some day. Talk of perilous exploits and daring-do and the Wickless Candle turned soon to dreams as Twig's eyes grew heavy and tired. She didn't even remember falling asleep. When she awoke, there was no sign of Tallow. A single note lay beside her. Going to find Wickless Candle. Pick above snout. Back soon. Tallow. Just then the ceiling of the cave began to tremble, dropping stalactites like spears. Twig fled her burrow, watching as kobolds dove for cover, crying and trembling. A group of the most weathered miners had gathered at the mouth of a cavern. Rocks and shrapnel tumbled from the shadows, punctuated by grinding metal and splintering wood. "Cave in! Cave in!" one cried, fastening his candled helmet tightly over his head.
"Get tools! Get candles! Get help!"
Twig lit her own candle as fast as she could and rushed into the fray. As she helped the miners shove roots and shovels to brace the tunnel, something on the ground caught her eye. A strand of shiny rocks tangled amid the rubble. The quaking died down as she cradled the necklace in her paws, trembling.
Has anyone seen Tallow?
Papa Whiskersnoot asked, taking stock of the kobolds present. With a moment of hesitation, Twig limply held out the necklace.
"Tallow leave note. Tallow go to find Wickless Candle."
Twig's ears drooped as she grasped the necklace tightly.
"We need start digging. Tallow could be trapped. Need save him."
The miners' faces all fell.
"Not safe to dig," one said. "Mine just braced. May give out again. Cave in bad, Twig. Tallow's candle snuffed out."
The kobolds hung their waxy heads, some bobbing mournfully in agreement. Some had already fallen to their knees, weeping about the darkness consuming poor little Tallow. Papa Whiskersnoot curled his paws into fists and ground his crooked teeth. He leaned in closer, and Twig's courage bent beneath the volume of his voice.
Me warn story was dangerous. Me told Twig no good come from looking to murky myths. And now Tallow snuffed. Darkness, take him because he believes stupid story.
And the quote is never pick above your snout, unless else the darkness snuff you out. Visions of Tallow being swallowed whole by inky blackness sent cold streaming through Twig's veins. She stamped her feet though she was shaking.
"Many reason Caven could come down. We waste time not looking for Tallow."
Darkness take more, Kobold, if we dig above snout. We lost one today, lose no more.
Papa Whiskersnoot caught Twig's ear between his chipped claws and pinched.
Especially not to a no such thing Wickless Candle.
Twig's eyes watered as she ground her teeth, surveying the cowering group before her. They were content to sit in the dirt and give up.
"You all just too scaredy. I scaredy, but I still want help Tallow."
Then darkness snuff you out too.
Papa Whiskersnoot turned on his calloused heel, ending the argument, and helped the miners seal off the ruined tunnel. From the back of the gathered crowd, Granny frowned at Papa. She started to hoist her pickaxe, but she fell into a coughing fit and tumbled to the ground. Twig ran to steady her, letting Granny lean against her arm for support.
"If me weren't so old and sick,"
Granny cursed, then looked to Twig knowingly. She gave her a single nod and pressed the fallen pickaxe into Twig's paws.
"Twig knows there is more to kobold life than tunnels. Twig right to be brave and look for lost little Tallow. His candle's still lit, me sure of it. Take me pickaxe, sweet Twig. Wickless Candle gave me light in me darkness. Now you must be Tallow's. Go, before Papa tried to stop you."
Twig's heart felt so full. She threw her arms around her grandmother and thanked her. After fixing her candle atop her chestnut head and pocketing Tallow's string of rocks, Twig threw the pickaxe over her shoulder and quietly scampered off into the tunnels. With one mine already collapsed, she'd need to be especially careful. Twig picked her way through the serpentine tunnels, listening for signs of life. Careful not to disturb large rocks or sleeping cave spiders, she pattered her way up an elevation alongside the ruined passageway. If she wasn't cautious, she could easily snuff out her own candle. Darkness, hunger, panic, or all three would consume her. Ahead of her, the tunnel was dim and growing dimmer. The only light she'd have going forward was from the one candle atop her head. Fear started its work early, prickling down Twig's neck.
"I'm scaredy,"
Twig said aloud to no one.
"but Tallow need me."
When she found just the right spot, she carefully positioned her pickaxe against a crack in the dull gray stone. The mine Tallow was trapped in should be just behind it. Her papa's words buzzed mercilessly in her mind like a swarm of angry spelunker bees.
Never pick above your snout, else the darkness snuff you out.
She pulled Granny's pickaxe back and swung. Bit by bit, rock came free from the tight alcove. With sustained effort, Twig chipped enough away to squeeze into the ruined tunnel. Her candle flickered across the mangled walls, but illuminated only stones. No tallow. Not yet. For hours she waded through stone and dirt, up and up the tunnel, cutting in footholds as she went. If she was right, Tallow had made it very far indeed. Otherwise, his body would have tumbled down to the mouth of the mine. Wax from her candle dripped down her snout, burning a warning. Continue on, and your light, too, shall run out. The candle was half spent and flickering. She was hungry and tired, but there was no remedy. Shadows closed in around her rapidly. She cupped her paws around her mouth and shouted,
Tallow! Tallow, me come to rescue you! Where are you?
Nothing. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Twig wiped her eyes and swung the pickaxe hard over her head. The metallic ring of steel striking stone clanged through the gaping passage and then transformed into a horrible rumble, tearing through the chasm like a snarl. The whole cavern began to quake. A crash like a scream and grinding rock overwhelmed Twig and threw her from the outcropping. She realized all too late that the scream was her own, and the grinding rocks were the great gray fists of a cave-in much stronger than she. The falling debris struck her candle and her head, snuffing the flame out. When Twig finally came to, she was shivering from the cold. All around her there was darkness so deep and inscrutable that she could not tell left from right nor up from down. Her head ached, and she felt bruised all over, but she couldn't see her own limbs. And to make matters worse, she'd lost her grip on Granny's pickaxe. Whimpering, directionless, Twig curled into a fuzzy, dirty ball, eyes wide and taking in no light. She'd be lost forever to this still cold oblivion.
Me sorry, Tallow. Sorry, Granny,
she whispered, choking on dust and tears.
Twig's been snuffed out, too. Snuffed out, too?
A voice in the darkness asked weakly. Twig sat up straight, turning her head aimlessly in the blackness.
Snuffed out, too?
She repeated, staring down the void with puffy red eyes.
Snuffed out, too?
As Twig crawled on all fours, hopefully in the right direction, her fingers brushed against a pathetic little lump half hidden under the fallen rocks. It was Tallow. Summoning all her might, Twig dug the lost kobold free with her exhausted, scraped-up paws. She couldn't see him, but she could feel him.
Me sorry, Twig,
Tallow sobbed weakly. He fumbled for her arm and held on tightly once he found it.
Can we go home?
Twig couldn't lie, but neither could she answer. They sat there for a while in the total darkness, holding on to each other, and a hope thinner than smoke. Crestfallen, with her eyes cast low, Twig suddenly caught sight of faint hints of silver. A stream of light was reflecting off something metal, pointy and curved. Granny's pickaxe lay a short distance away, illuminated like a beacon, like a candle. Twig grasped Tallow's hand, and they slowly made their way toward the pickaxe. Once closer, she could see a tiny pinprick in the craggy wall. A golden glow flowed from it, and Twig leveled her pickaxe. Tallow clung feebly to her as she hefted the axe high. She picked and she picked with every ounce of strength left in her. And then she broke through into the light. At first she could hardly look at anything. Her amber eyes squinted in the overwhelming brightness. While her vision adjusted, she felt the ground beneath her paws. It was oddly soft and warm. Plants sprouted beneath her and stretched farther than her stinging eyes could see, but even still it was beautiful. A short distance away from where Twig had broken through the ground, a river of sparkling clean water babbled playfully over red and purple stones. Peaceful flowers swayed. I'll go back and look at that in a second. Above the verdant earth, such a pure white color Twig had never known existed. The air was astonishingly fresh without the slightest hint of must, and above it all blazed an enormous yellow flame that needed neither wick nor wax. And here we have Twig, or whatever her name is. Yeah, Twig. Just in the sunlight. It's a good job they've done making a little kobold look cute. Twig pulled herself to her feet and stared up, mouth agape, at the great wickless candle. Even Tallow cracked open his eyes to stare in complete awe. Though it hurt to look at, she couldn't pull herself away. After all those sleep times, begging Granny to tell her the tale her papa hated most, here she was, standing beneath the purest candlelight she had always believed in. But even as she marveled in the light, Twig had another realization. She must bring the Wickless Candle back to the Whiskersnoot clan, back to her doubting papa and her deserving granny. But how? Apart from the size of the flame, the Wickless Candle seemed to hang from an enormous blue ceiling that stretched on endlessly in all directions. She set tallow down in a patch of white flowers and tried scaling the nearby boulders. Try as she might to scramble up them, she was still much too far away to reach the flame. A taller wooden structure looked promising, but even scampering up to the tippy top wouldn't bring the Wickless Candle to her grasp. She swung her granny's pickaxe high as she could, but nothing connected. The Wickless Candle blazed on tirelessly and infinitely out of reach. Unwilling to give up, Twig looked around. If she couldn't bring the Wickless Candle to her clan, she needed to entice them to see it for themselves.
Twig?
Tallow called, holding one of the white flowers. As he grasped it, all his scrapes and bruises healed before her eyes. How had this happened? And so quickly? Tallow brought the bloom to his snout and inhaled deeply.
Thank you, flower.
Twig stopped and stooped over the patch of flowers to admire them. As she did, her head stopped hurting and her bruises faded away. Thank you, flowers, she breathed in wonder. Their golden centers and bright white petals reminded her of the shape of the Wickless Candle. Perhaps they would do instead. Gently she pulled a single white flower free of its roots and tucked it into her knapsack. It was still warm from the candle's shining light.
Follow me, Tallow.
Twig smiled and took the youngling's hand again.
We go home and show proof of Wickless Candle. But we have to go through the darkness again.
Tallow's ears folded back fearfully.
Darkness didn't snuff out Tallow or Twig, and we find candle that never burn out. We can be the light now and be brave.
Legs driven by renewed confidence and hearts pumping with excitement swiftly carried Twig and Tallow hand in hand through the collapsed tunnel, down through the darkness that could stop them no longer, and back to the familiar embrace of glowing mushrooms and the echoing scrapes of shovels.
Tallow is alive!
Twig cheered, scurrying down the halls.
Tallow is alive! And the Wickless Candle is real,
chittered Tallow. For a moment, Tallow's presence was welcomed with surprise and relieved embraces, but the mood soon soured. Twig's triumph was greeted by the solemn, mournful eyes of her papa as he stood with his paws folded before him. The rest of the Whiskersnoot kobolds hunched low and held their heads lower. While Twig was gone, Granny had fallen very ill. She was not long for this world. Twig rushed to Granny's side, dropping her pickaxe as she knelt. Granny lay nestled with several blankets piled atop her thin body, and even still her paws were cold as Twig took them in her own. The old kobold's eyes barely broke open to acknowledge her granddaughter's presence.
Granny,
Twig choked, feeling her courage slip out uselessly between her teeth.
me did it. Me found Tallow, and me found the Wickless Candle. Have proof that Granny's story is real.
As if it would shatter at her touch, Twig tenderly lifted the peaceful bloom from her knapsack.
See? Still warm from Wickless Candle. Looks like it, too.
Slower than sweet syrup running down the edge of a mushroom cake, Granny ran her fingers over the petals.
I want to see it.
Granny choked.
Me wick is running low, but me still have enough flame for this.
In that moment, Twig felt struck with clarity. The flowers beneath the Wickless Candle had healed her and Tallow. There were plenty of flowers just outside the mouth of the tunnel she had created. Perhaps they would heal Granny, too. Twig watched as Papa Whiskersnoot looked to his daughter and then to his dying mother.
We should see the Wickless Candle,
he said. Twig called a group of young tenderfoots to the center of the mine.
Friends, Tallow is back with us. Me know you doubted before, but me have proof of the Wickless Candle. And there are flowers that grow beneath it that save Tallow and will save me, Granny. If trust me, and we all dig up together, we can save her quick like, and you can all see the Wickless Candle for yourselves. Have courage, friends. Have courage.
There was silence for a time as decisions were made in little fuzzy heads. Then the tenderfoots all cheered and held their pickaxes high, nodding and wanting to see the undying flame above them. Twig jumped and thrust her fist in the air triumphantly.
Onward, Whisker Snoots! We dig above our snouts, but we dig careful. We look out for each other, and we will see the Wickless Candle.
The youths speared their way through the rock and began to pick upward at Twig's direction. Her original tunnel was far too twisting and small, but together they cleared the path to the Wickless Candle in no time. With some paws steadying the stone, others spotting for the diggers, and still more guiding pickaxes, they managed to avoid falling stones or cave-ins altogether. When they broke through the surface, they had made a sloping ramp up through the rock and into the shiny grass field wide enough for 6 kobolds to pass. Each of them was blinded at first by the brilliant light, but as their vision returned to them, they stood in wonder of the stunning world they had fearfully cast off for untold generations. Eyes finally unclouded by doubt, they admired the flowering fields, the pleasantly bubbling river, and the great Wickless Candle. Behind them, the miners and Papa Whiskersnoot pushed Granny up the chasm in a minecart filled with moss and blankets. She clasped the tiny flower in her folded paws atop her chest. Loving paws lifted Granny high and then laid her on the soft ground. The band of young kobolds wreathed her in the bloom, some forming chains of stems and draping them around her.
We hear,
Twig whispered to Granny.
Wickless Candle is here.
The quote, his eyes finally unclouded by doubt, they admired the flowering fields, the pleasantly bubbling river, and the great Wickless Candle. Granny's eyes opened and she stared up into the light of the great Wickless Candle. A gasp of awe escaped her lips and tears welled in her eyes. Twig watched as all the years of endurance and rejection melted into a justified smile. She seemed to relax for the first time in Twig's entire memory, but on the bed of peaceful white flowers, Granny's breathing was still harsh, and her paws still quaked.
What's happening? Why no heal Granny?
Twig asked aloud, already looking to her right and left for more of the flowers. But Granny's gentle paw turned Twig's snout to face her, with a tear rolling down her long face. She was smiling wider than Twig had ever seen. Granny held her hand as tightly as her ailing muscles would allow.
It is me time to go, Twig.
Surrounded by the glistening white petals, she was radiant.
Me life has been full, and fuller yet, for loving Twig. Me wick has run out, me wax spent, but that only bring me closer to the Wickless Candle. Me can rest beneath its warm light, thanks to Twig.
Twig held Granny Whiskersnoot's hand long after her breathing had stopped. The Whiskersnoot kobolds gathered around Granny, pawing at her fur and brushing their cheeks against hers. Above them, the Wickless Candle burned brighter, bathing them all in its comforting embrace. Even though Granny's candle had gone out, Twig was grateful for Tallow's safety and Papa Whiskersnoot's newfound good faith. Every day she would climb out of the darkness of the mines and sit beneath the Wickless Candle, thinking fondly of her Granny. She watched the brilliant flame float about the blue ceiling, moving from one edge of the horizon to the other, never flickering or fading. Twig wondered where it was going, what adventure it was on with her Granny. On a particularly stunning morning, courageous Twig set out to follow the Wickless Candle. With Granny's pickaxe in hand, she took to the hills, plateaus, and mountains of Azeroth, scaling the tallest peaks she could find. Each pick above her snout brought her closer to the Wickless Candle, closer to her Granny, and out into the light. Okay, so that was a much cuter story, and I would also say, you know what, it makes you kind of feel, I gotta go back and look at my encounters with kobolds, because yeah, they attack on sight, but is there much in the lore that indicates that they are really evil and not just stupid and fearful? Something to think about, fellow travelers of Azeroth. But we're putting this one to bed. We have another episode in the pipe, 5x5, and as always, I thank you for watching and for listening. I will see you on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.